Hello and welcome. This is Paul Sandhu on Wake Up and Live Radio coming to you with another episode. Today, my guest is going to be Richard Sauder down in Ecuador. Richard is a researcher, an author par excellence, and his specialty is, of course, the underground world. Or I should say the underworld, not necessarily underground because it can be undersea. And he has done a great deal of research in this realm, and he has written at least 3 books that I'm aware of. His first one was Underground Bases and Tunnels, What is the Government Trying to Hide? The next one, I believe, was Underwater and Underground Bases. And his final one, which I'm in the process of reading right now and enjoying it tremendously, is Hidden in Plain Sight Beyond the X-Files. So today I will be speaking to Richard about his extensive knowledge in this realm of a world that exists beneath our feet in the ground and also in the waters surrounding our planet. So hello and welcome, Richard. Are you with us?
Thank you so much for having me, Paul.
It is indeed a delight and a pleasure because I have heard you speak many times on Coast to Coast and other programs. I would say dozens of times, and now, like I said, I'm reading your book, and I have always thought of contacting you and to do a program or two with you, and hopefully we will do a series of these programs because your information is quite extensive. So I truly am delighted that we were able to make contact. We are down in Ecuador in South America, and that we are able to connect via Skype and do this program. So Richard, let's begin by perhaps you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and what led you into this inquiry of underground construction, underground bases, both of a military nature and of private corporate nature, and then we will go into all the, or at least some of the information that you have discovered in your research.
Well, Paul, I'm a native Virginian. I was born in Virginia, which is one of the American states on the east coast of North America. And I'm 59 years old. I spent most of my life in various states, in different states and regions of the United States of America, but I have also traveled extensively internationally in some 25 different countries, and have studied and lived in a few other countries. At present, I've been here in South America and Ecuador. I'm into my 4th year. And I intend to remain in South America, given what's going on in the United States and in the Northern Hemisphere in general. I more and more feel that if humanity has a future on this planet, and I do not know if the human race has a future on this planet, but if so, I believe that a lot of that future, at least the best quality of it, would be in the Southern Hemisphere. As I said, I've traveled around the world a lot. I've studied and read voraciously in many different fields. I have 4 different academic degrees in sociology, in Latin American studies, in forestry and ecosystem management, and also in political science, and 3 of those degrees are graduate degrees. During the course of my graduate studies, back in the late 20th century, I first heard about rumors and stories about underground bases in the American Southwest. I was living in the southwestern states at that time. I spent about 8 years in the states of New Mexico and Arizona, living and studying. I got two graduate degrees in those states respectively, and while I was there, I heard these stories about purported secret underground bases and tunnels, and I didn't know what to make of them. I didn't dismiss them out of hand. I just found them interesting. When I had a little bit of a break in my academic schedule, I availed myself of a good academic research library that had sizable United States government document uh, repository. And I went right to the government documents, industrial and technical literature, and also the general literature, general interest literature, be it periodicals or books. And, you know, a large research library at a major university has a lot of resources. And so I began to find some preliminary information, and I wrote a brief article for UFO magazine, which I believe recently ceased publication after many years. But back in the late 1980s and early 1990s, it was very much a going concern. And I wrote a short article for UFO magazine saying that I had found evidence of a fair number of underground bases, and some of them quite large and technically sophisticated, such as under Cheyenne Mountain at NORAD in Colorado, or Mount Weather, the big FEMA base in the mountains in northern Virginia. Installations such as that I could document from the open literature. And I wrote a short article that appeared in, I think, early November 1992 or 1991, something like that. And the magazine came out. Now it was a small circulation magazine. I think it usually had less than 20,000 copies printed, so it was a niche publication. But the article appeared, and in the article I said, certainly there are some of these underground bases and facilities, and they can be quite large and sophisticated, but that I found no evidence of purported aliens in them, and that was part of the story I'd been hearing. But that nevertheless there were a fair number of these large underground bases, and then the article appeared, and I felt like at that point I had been there and done that. Well, about 6 or 7 weeks later, just in the week between Christmas and New Year's, I was awakened from a sound sleep in the early hours of the morning by a voice that spoke to me very quietly in my ear, as if I had a little tiny earpiece from a transistor radio, you know, like kids used to listen to years ago. You'd have a little transistor radio with a tiny earpiece. Nowadays, people have earbuds. It was very much like an earbud. And I had that, and that was the effect of listening to a quiet voice speak to me very matter-of-factly. So I was very asleep, and all of a sudden I was very awake, laying in bed on my back and wondering why I had awakened. And within 5 seconds or less, I heard a man's voice talking to me in my ear, and it was very quiet and matter-of-fact. The first thing he said to me was, "The underground bases are real." He was just very emphatic about it. And immediately in the first second, I understood I was listening to the voice of a real flesh and blood man. Never for 1 second, then or now, did I ever believe that I was hearing the voice of either a demon or an angel, or that I was losing my mind, or that an extraterrestrial was talking to me, or anything like that. From the very first second, I understood that a real man was talking to me, and that he was using some kind of technological means. And I subsequently researched and found out that there are patents for microwave transmitters that will transmit intelligible language right to the inner ear. And that's exactly the effect that I experienced.
Well, can I interrupt you for a second? Like this is very interesting, because this is this voice to skull technology, you know, which has been documented, and there are I have heard I think his name is Roger Tolsas. He's been on Coast to Coast a few times, and he speaks about this a great deal. How
Patrick Flanagan was the one who got the patent for voice to skull to voice technology years ago. Patrick Flanagan is a kind of a scientific whiz kid. Now he's, of course, up in years. He has many patents. but this is not really voice to skull. The technology I'm talking about is remote, and it is actually a microwave technology. It's certain frequencies of microwaves permit to transmit directly to either the audio cortex or the visual cortex. And this is what I experienced. And the guy went on, and there are patents for this, and I discussed them in my second book, which is Kundalini Tales. I actually lay out in the appendix, extensive appendix, the patent for just this technology. But nonetheless, the voice went on to tell me for about 2 or 3 minutes that indeed the underground bases are real. They can be quite vast. I mean, huge, enormous, just sprawl. And that there are projects and programs being carried out that are staggering in scope, and that the average person would be astonished, just mind-boggled, if they knew what was going on. But in fact, people don't know what's going on, so out of sight, out of mind. And as he spoke to me, I was getting a mental picture of what he was talking about that came along with the voice. And what he was describing and what I was seeing inwardly was just huge. I mean, just on an enormous scale. And it was clear to me from what I was seeing and also envisioning that all of this could not go on without generating a huge paper trail, because of the large corporations that are certainly involved, and also government agencies and non-government agencies. It's not only American military. There's a spectrum of different organizations and agencies, some with names, some without names, but just quite a lot going on. And so after he spoke to me very briefly, and after he stopped, I thought, okay, this is big. This is really big. And if what he's saying to me is so, then there will be a paper trail. And when I wake up tomorrow, I'll start looking for the paper trail. So there was nothing I could do at that time. I just went back to sleep. Of course, when I awakened the next morning, I remembered what had happened during the night. And indeed, that very week, I did begin going right to the literature. I went back to the 1940s to government technical reports and documents, military and non-military. I went to the mining industry. I went through NASA files. I mean, you name it. I went through Look magazine. I went through the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature. I went all the way back to the World War II era and came forward. And I found quite a lot of documentation that exactly demonstrates to this point exactly that there has been, at least since the World War II era, and perhaps before, a very large-scale ongoing program of underground excavation and construction. And also, as I subsequently discovered, it extends undersea. I found a paper trail for plans for building large manned deep undersea bases down in the seafloor that can even accommodate large military submarines. And they are hundreds of feet long. These large submarines the military has,
Right.
They're like 400, 500, 600 feet long. They're enormous. And the plans I saw, and I put some of those plans in my books. The plans I saw were for multiple large submarines to go through deep underwater airlocks and go into these massive bases down in the seafloor, and the crews can stay there and live, and the submarines can dock there, and they're just, the plans I saw were for very large facilities.
That sounds like something out of a James Bond movie.
Well, Ian Fleming had a background with MI6, with the British intelligence services, and I understand that Ludlam had some involvement with the intelligence services as well. So when you read
And Tom
those guys'
Clancy and
books,
like a lot of these
yes,
fiction,
right,
right?
right. So when you read these books and they talk about these kinds of futuristic installations and technologies, what they're discussing in fictional form are things that in actuality do exist, but they get away with it because they're writing fiction novels.
Now, from listening to you and reading some of your works and some of the other people that have spoken about this, it seems like it's around the time of, let's say, the 1930s, because the Nazis were very, or the Germans, let's say, were very advanced in this sort of underground and possibly underwater constructions as well. So, although this has been going on, like for example, under the Vatican, they have all these catacombs, or like there are whole cities, like in Malta and Turkey and places like that, that were excavated underground centuries ago. So this is not something new. But in the modern era, this seems to have come into its own, beginning in around the 1930s or so. Are you in agreement with that?
Yes, as far as we know from the open record, and not only Germans, but remember the French constructed their famous Maginot Line in eastern and northeastern France to repel the feared German invasion. Of course, and that was mostly underground, and the French had living quarters and underground trains and you name it. They had thousands of men living underground to repel the German invasion. Of course, the Germans knew the Maginot Line was there and that it was very heavily defended and well armed. So instead of attack the Maginot Line, the Germans just drove around the Maginot Line. They went around the end of it, so they outflanked it, and nonetheless, the Germans did the same thing in the east, and they had the Regenwurmslager in the eastern part of their territory in what would now be Poland, where they constructed miles and miles of underground tunnels, installations with electric trains, and so the Germans just took a page from the French. But it wasn't just the French and the Germans, of course. Gibraltar, I've been told, is just honeycombed. I mean, I've read is just honeycombed with tunnels. Gibraltar, the various occupying forces have been tunneling and excavating in the island, the fortress rock of Gibraltar, since Roman times or before, and it's continued right up into the present day. So there are many examples, not only from the 21st and 20th century, but from previous centuries. And of course, the Egyptians were great excavators. One of the great hidden secrets, but not as hidden as it used to be, is that the duat of so-called ancient Egyptian mythology really exists. There are miles of excavated tunnels and caverns below the Giza Plateau and beneath the step pyramid at Saqqara, for example. There are miles and miles of deep underground tunnels and huge chambers. It's not known exactly when and why all of those many miles of tunnels were made, either by the ancient Egyptians themselves or the previous civilization that antedated ancient Egypt. So this tunneling business and building underground structures has been going on for a long time. And of course, you alluded to the ancient underground cities in Turkey. Some of those have been excavated and explored, but not all of them, and that's in the Cappadocia region. No one knows exactly when they were built, although it was certainly thousands of years ago, at least 3,500 years ago, and maybe much earlier than that, but a long time ago. No writing has been found in them, no artwork or statues, nothing like that. When they were discovered, again, in the 1960s or so, there was nothing in them, nothing at all, just stripped bare. So whoever used them stripped them down to the floor and to the walls when they left. And I know a Turkish woman who's been in them, or at least some of them. One of them goes down 900 feet underground, 20 levels,
Wow.
and could have accommodated 20,000 people underground. So these things we know about because they're on the public record. I have to assume there have been other discoveries that have been kept secret. It's amazing that this much is on the record, but this business of deep underground tunneling, various segments of humanity have been at it in various places around the world for thousands of years. But you're right, in the modern, so-called modern era, it all stepped up another notch technologically, as far as we're concerned, round about the period of World War II, just before, during, and after, when the United States went into formerly Nazi-occupied Europe, they discovered the many underground facilities that had been made by the Germans during the 30s and right up until 1945. During the Nazi period, the vast majority of that was done by the Todt organization. The Todt organization was somewhat analogous to the Army Corps of Engineers or the Navy Seabees in the American military system. The Todt organization was very good and very technically capable civil engineering organization. It was not military, but it was tasked with coordinating very closely with the German military, with the Nazi military,
But
which it did.
that's the normal MO though, right? There's a lot of private and military cooperation that goes on in these sort of projects. So and this is true even to this day, is it not?
Well, what the reason they did that was because it wasn't because they for compartmentalization reasons. It was just that Fritz Todt was the premier civil engineer in Germany. He was the father of the German Autobahn system, which was the predecessor to the American interstate highway system. In fact, the American interstate highway system started 20 years later under Eisenhower and was copied after the Autobahn. Of course, Eisenhower was the conquering Allied general
Right.
when the American army. So Eisenhower saw personally the German Autobahn, and when he became president, he implemented the same project in the United States. But it was just done for bureaucratic reasons, and what they did was construct a lot of things, not only highways and gun emplacements and all kinds of airfields and any facility the German military wanted or needed, but also a lot of underground facilities. Fritz Todt died in an airplane crash in 1942 in the middle of World War II. And one of his right-hand men, Xaver Dorsch, who was also a very gifted engineer, took over the Todt organization and reported to Albert Speer. And then in about 1944 or so, Adolf Hitler requested that Xaver Dorsch should report directly to Hitler and not to Speer. And what Hitler wanted was for Dorsch to make more deep underground installations, including heavy industrial installations, because the bombing by the British and the Americans was devastating German heavy industry. So he wanted to move it underground, and so they started doing that. Of course, the war ended in the spring of 1945, Northern Hemisphere, and so Dorsch was taken into custody by the American military. And my research indicates he spent something like maybe anywhere from at least 2 years and maybe up to 5 or 6 years in American military custody. In any event, he was in a prolonged American military custody immediately after World War II. They debriefed him extensively. I got at least 2 of the documents that he produced, and I'm assuming there's much more that he produced that's classified to this day. The documents that I got were not easy to obtain, but they did demonstrate that the American military was aware of who he was. They knew his specialty. They knew what he had done, and they wanted him to do that for the United States military. In fact, in my research, I found 2 declassified Project Paperclip memoranda, and these were in the NASA, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, files, archives in Washington, D.C., but 2 declassified Project Paperclip memoranda that specifically requested Sauder and a number of other men to come to the United States under Project Paperclip to work on the American military's underground plant program. I'm assuming that either he did come to the United States or that he cooperated with them extensively on that program, because beginning immediately after World War II, the United States military did begin a program of construction of sophisticated underground bases, and my information indicates that program has never stopped. That's been like 70 years now, and it's still going on. Now, one of the things that Sauder did was he didn't disappear. In the early 1950s, he founded an important civil engineering company in Germany, which exists to this day, Dorsch Engineering, and it's a major German civil engineering company to this day. So he didn't disappear. He was involved in major civil engineering consulting and construction projects after World War II, but there's a period of years immediately after World War II where he kind of goes under the radar, and my information indicates that he was collaborating with the American military during that period, as a lot of other engineers and scientists were under Project Paperclip. But this was the underground construction aspect of Project Paperclip. Now, to bring it closer to the present day, in 1987, Lloyd Dusha, who then was the Deputy Director of Engineering for the United States Army Corps of Engineers, gave a talk at a engineering conference at MIT. And in his talk had to do with underground construction, because that was the general theme of the conference. And in his remarks, he went on to say that beginning in the 1940s, after World War II, the United States military had realized the strategic importance of underground construction. And of course, they realized this because of what the Nazis had done, and because of debriefing Sauder. And they knew that they had to come up to speed fast. And they did. And Dusha went on to say in his remarks that because of that, the United States military and the United States Army Corps of Engineers had constructed a number of underground facilities, some of which were very large and sophisticated, on the order of something like the base at NORAD, beneath Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado, but that due to the unusual character of some of these facilities and their classified nature, he couldn't say anything more about them, and he didn't. However, because of my research, I can make a real educated guess about the unusual nature of these classified facilities. I think what makes them unusual is either that they are under sea, or on the moon and Mars. Because in my research, I subsequently came across plenty of evidence, not only for constructing tunnels and bases underground, and there are a good number of them. We don't know the total number, but my research indicates there are a fair number of them, let's put it that way. And they can be very large and very deep. As one world-class expert that I talked with pointed out to me, I asked him how deep could a major underground base be, and he looked at me and he said, well, you know, it's given the state of the art in underground excavation today, going 1 mile deep is relative child's play. Those are his words. So 1 mile and more. And Ducha's remarks spurred me to look through the literature, and I combed through it. I've been to many research libraries and documents repositories, and one of the things I believe he was alluding to is undersea bases, because I've found a strong paper trail for research and design of undersea bases, manned undersea bases. And second, I found repeated references to going mining the moon and Mars, going there and mining, establishing mining colonies. I'm guessing that has been done through the Black Projects, through the secret space program.
Maybe that's why they have a lot of these Hollywood movies that deal with this theme about mining. For example, that Total Recall movie where they had these mining operations on Mars, So
it was a secret CIA colony on Mars.
Right.
And the people there were who went and came from there were mind controlled. What they did was compartmentalized in their mind. And Arnold Schwarzenegger played the lead in that film. And it was the classic mind, F-U-C-K. Pardon me.
Right.
Such that, and this is, of course, starting at that same era, in the immediate post-World War II era, we now know the CIA had the famous MK Ultra program, where they played with specifically this technology, creating alternate personalities, compartmentalizing consciousness and the human mind such that you could have 2 or 3 or more discrete personalities inhabiting the same human brain or body, if you will, but with each personality living completely oblivious to the reality of the others.
Right. Now it seems to me, Richard, that the Nazis basically, they everybody thinks they lost the war, but it seems more like they just relocated. They moved their headquarters from Berlin to Washington because they gave us the CIA, NASA, all these military projects that are highly classified. They all seem to have come out of German minds, and even this mind control program, psychiatry, you can trace it all back to the Germans and Nazis. So it appears that they have not really gone away, but they are just have changed their uniform, so to speak.
Well, there's a trail of evidence that tends very much in that direction. Of course, Project Paperclip had direct implications for NASA, and also development of intercontinental ballistic missiles, nuclear missiles.
Right.
There were over 100 Nazi scientists, engineers, and technicians that came over to the United States.
That we know of.
Yes, that we know of. I'm sure there were more, but I have documentation for that, and so do others. That was just to work on American rockets and missiles. Some of them worked on the military side and ballistic missiles and also cruise missiles. And then also on the civilian side, so-called, in NASA, developing the manned space program.
And also very heavily involved, I might add, in the pharmaceutical industry.
Well, I'm getting around to that. IG Farben was the great German industrial conglomerate during World War II. After the war, it was broken up. It wasn't destroyed. It was just broken up into its component industries. And much of that continued unabated, in fact, right down to the present day. One of the great centers for IG Farben was in Ludwigshafen, which is a town right across the Rhine River from the city of Mannheim. And to this day, Ludwigshafen is the home of BASF, which is the huge German chemical firm. BASF was one of the units that was spun off from IG Farben after the war. So this happened And IG Farben didn't disappear. It just was reformatted, just given a different legal profile, a different corporate profile. And this happened, there's example after example of this. Now, a lot of the engineers were involved in rocketry and that kind of thing, electronics, but not all. As we know, based on my research, some of them came over or were co-opted into the underground base construction program that got underway right after World War II. Some of them, as you observe, went into pharmaceuticals. There was a component of Project Paperclip that had to do with psychiatry. And in fact, one of the people I talked to during my research was Colonel Fletcher Prudy. He died a few years back, but I spoke to him back in the 1990s, and he told me, Richard, he was a liaison during the Cold War between the CIA and the American military, and it was so he was in a position to know a lot of highly classified information. One of the things he told me was, Richard, when we brought over these German psychiatrists after World War II under Project Paperclip, and we didn't fully understand that they had a very different concept of psychiatry than we did, and I felt like saying to him, "No shit, Sherlock."
Yeah, right.
But you're right. They came over, and also Hubertus Struckhold was one of them that was involved in aerospace medicine, and he was brought to San Antonio. He went to Randolph Air Force Base and spent the post-World War II period conducting research for the United States military at Randolph Air Force Base in South Texas. Just one example. This happened at military bases and government research facilities and major Fortune 500 companies all over the United States. There were lots of these guys, and they had a huge effect on the system in terms of the CIA. The German spy apparatus in Central and Eastern Europe, the Gehlen, there was a general named Reinhard Gehlen who was in charge of espionage for Hitler in Central and Eastern Europe during the Nazi period, basically. And he cut a deal when the Third Reich fell apart in the spring of 1945. Gehlen cut a deal with Allen Dulles to bring over his spy network, his German spy network, whole cloth, and merge it with the American, essentially the American
OSS at that time, I guess.
It was the OSS, but in 47 became the CIA in 1947. To merge it with the American espionage services and with the Germans, which he did. And Gehlen was not prosecuted. In fact, from the very beginning, the CIA was a very heavily influenced Nazi organization from the first day, from its inception. And Gehlen essentially and his network was so closely integrated into the post-war German system that I guess you could say that the German espionage system, Nazi espionage system, was just taken over into the post-war German espionage system and the post-war United States espionage system. So
basically the CIA and the SS or something equivalent to that, they kind of merged, and so the CIA, you could say, is indeed, at least partially, if not wholly, a Nazi organization.
Well, yeah, from the beginning, and the BND is the German espionage service in post-World War II period. But both of them, from the mid to late 40s on, because of these deals that Reinhard Gehlen, he was a general in the Nazi system, but the deals that he cut were, you got a problem. Both the German government after World War II, it was under American military occupation, and still is. There's still American military bases on German soil, and still many thousands of American military personnel there. So Germany is still under American military occupation 70 years after,
Right.
69 years after World War II. That never ended. So, yes, from the starting at the end of World War II and coming forward to the present day, there's been this very heavy Nazi influence in German espionage and in American espionage, and of course in the military-industrial complex and in other areas, in finance as well. The Germans, starting already in mid 43, 44, coming forward, the Germans were moving vast amounts of money, billions and billions of dollars worth of assets out of Nazi-occupied Europe and into other areas of the world through shell companies and proxies. They were hedging their bets. They could see that they might not win the war, so they were laying the groundwork for what would happen after the war. And of course, to do anything in this world, at any level, you need money. And the bigger the project you have, the more money you need. And so there was this multifaceted plan put in motion. And by the way, Nazi technicians, engineers, and scientists did not go only to the United States. Quite a lot of them went to Russia. Many of them went to the Middle East, to places like Syria, and also to Egypt, Iraq. A lot of them went to South America.
And even to Canada.
So yes. And there were quite a lot who went to Texas, including to the Texas Hill Country. I lived in Texas, and I was told by some old-timers, in particular one old-timer in the Texas Hill Country, which dating back to the mid-19th century, has had a strong German presence. There was German colonization of central and southern Texas in the mid-1800s. This was before Texas became a state in the United States of America. But so there were many Germans who went there, and to this day, there are many ethnic Germans in that region of Texas. After World War II, there were a lot of these German SS officers and so forth who went into exile in that German-speaking area of Texas. I was told that the last known German Nazi SS officer in the Texas Hill Country, the German-speaking region of Texas, died in about 1997 or 99, somewhere through there. If there are any left, they would be very old men now, in their late 80s and 90s. But this happened. Right. And so it went on. The history that we've learned at school, in many ways, is false. It's propaganda. And so, bringing it down to the present day, this huge program of construction of deep underground bases and undersea bases has been ongoing for the last several decades. Military agencies are involved. Non-military agencies are involved. My understanding is that there are. It was put to me like this by one of my sources, that one of the agencies involved, and perhaps the principal agency, is simply referred to as the organization. It appears to have no national allegiance. It is a force in and of itself. If it needs to use the United States Army Corps of Engineers, it will. If it needs to use a Robbins tunnel boring machine, it will. If it needs to coordinate with the narcotics cartels in Mexico, it will, etc.
Is it what you might call a human organization, or it might be something?
Some of both. I gather from the conversations I had with this one source that yes, there are humans involved, and the humans would be United States military, United States non-military, religious organizations such as the Catholic Church, major banks, major corporations, and other organizations that are that really have no name. They have a lot of power. They have money and technology, but you wouldn't probably read their name in the daily newspaper or see it on the network television news. The world is much different than we've been told. But some of the big companies involved in the United States would be Parsons, Brinkerhoff, Quaid and Douglas, Kiewit, Robbins Tunnel Boring Machine Company, Jacobs Associates, which is a big civil engineering company out of California, Black and Veatch, or it's either pronounced Black and Veatch or Black and Vetch, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Navy underwater construction teams, and so forth. And then other countries, I was told that Aerospatiale, which was the huge French conglomerate, was involved in this secret underground base construction. Of course, Aerospatiale, I think, ceased to exist as a corporate entity about 10 years ago. It was bought out by someone else, or its units were spun off to other big companies. And, this is quite common nowadays in the corporate world, these mergers and acquisitions, and it's a corporate shell game. It makes it harder to discover who's doing what and where the money is moving and who's behind projects. It's all a huge international corporate shell game. Siemens, companies like Siemens in Germany are involved. All of the big technology companies are certainly involved and have been for decades, and it's just been going on for a long time, Paul.
I agree with you that this kind of activity has been going on for probably much longer than even you and I, who have a great deal of interest in this subject and also have done some studying on it. And I have not done nearly as much as you have, but still, it's probably dates back further and it goes deeper, no pun intended, than either one of us can fathom at this time, and we probably need.
Well, you know what? I was told by one source, and I didn't know what to think about this. Let me preface that by saying when I began my research, I didn't know the state of the art. And I happened to go to a public talk on a topic that was not even related to underground base construction or underground bases. And as I was listening to the man talk, I suddenly realized this man knows something about underground bases. He made a very brief, off-topic, off-the-cuff remark that I'm sure most people didn't even pick up on. But the remark was sufficiently interesting that after the talk, I went up to him and asked if I could come to his office and converse with him privately. And he said, sure. So within the next week or two, I went to his office and talked to him briefly, maybe 15 or 20 minutes. And I asked him about a certain place. I was living then in New Mexico. I asked him about a certain place that I suspected there might be an underground base. And I said, I think there's an underground base in such and such a place. He looked at me and he said, there is. I said, well, how deep is it? And he said, 1 mile. That blew me away. I thought he was pulling my leg. But I subsequently discovered as I continued the research and talking with other experts that 1 mile is just scratching the surface. These bases can go down 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles. I don't know what the lower limit is. I had another source tell me that some of these bases can be 12 or 14 miles down. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I'm not telling you that's the case. I'm saying that's what I was told. I do know for a fact they can be easily 1 mile underground, 2 miles, even 3 miles. But whether it can go down 12 or 14 miles, I can't tell you that for a fact. I haven't seen any documentation for that. However, I'm open to it, but I would say at least 1 mile, 2 miles up to 3 miles. Oh yeah, they can be real deep, and quite sophisticated technology.
Well, let's talk
Technologically,
about the technology here, because when you talk about something that deep,
magnetic,
no,
magnetic
just 1 second.
technology.
What I was alluding to, Richard, was that if you were to build something, let's say a mile down, and let's say it's a mile cube, there's a lot of dirt that needs to be excavated. Okay, so how that portion of it, like, what happens to all the material that must of necessity need to be excavated if they are building them that size? Like, is there a
Well, let me
technology?
let me tell you.
Okay, go ahead.
Let me tell you. What happened at the same time that you had this sharp uptick in underground-based construction? The construction of the interstate highway system in the United States. Now, what do you need to build interstate highways? Well, you need a lot of sand and gravel to make concrete. You just need untold thousands, probably millions of tons of sand and gravel. Now, where are you going to get all that sand and gravel from? Well, if you have machines grinding away around through solid rock underground, they're going to produce tons and tons of gravel. So there you go. You just use that gravel in constructing of highways. When you're undersea, I asked the same question as regards undersea. The question I was given is, well, you just mix it in a slurry, and this is quite common in the mining industry. Mix it in a slurry, pump it through a slurry pipe to the ocean floor and into a submarine canyon, an undersea canyon. Just flush it to the ocean floor directly.
Yeah, the oceans would probably be simpler to dispose of than it would be above ground.
Well, and in the literature that I saw, this was discussed very much, very openly, in some of the documents I got from the United States Army Corps of Engineers, that you simply take the excavated material and you spread it out. You can use it as gravel on roads or whatever. Especially in the western United States, there are a lot of gravel roads. So it's really not an issue at all. You don't make a big pile of, a 6,000 foot tall pile of gravel somewhere.
Right.
You use it. For example, I'll give you one example. The Monsanto underground base, which was first begun in the immediate post-World War II period, about 1948 or 49, something like that, which is right on the outskirts of Albuquerque, in the foothills of the Monsanto Mountains, and on the edge of the Kirtland Air Force Base and Sandia National Laboratory Complex. I've been told that entire mountain range, there's a substantial mountains. They're about 10 or 11,000 feet tall, and they stretch for miles north-south from the southeast quadrant of Albuquerque. They stretch south a good, 50 miles or so. And I've been told that they are extensively tunneled out. One of the leading experts told me that in a semi-classified briefing, that underground base was described in terms that he related to me as vast, not big, not enormous, but just vast. It just sprawls. It's vast. The mountain chain is just honeycombed. And so they've been at that for over half a century now. And don't you know that at the very northern end of that mountain range, there's a large rock quarry?
Okay, that would certainly solve some problems, I guess.
You follow me?
Yeah.
I can give you other examples in my research of other examples of bases that I've researched where either immediately adjacent to or in reasonably close proximity to places where there are major underground facilities, there are either major mines or rock quarries. So, and this is something I've run across in the literature too, of using mines and rock quarries as cover for underground installations, because you can conceal your underground excavation under cover of ordinary industrial activity. And the whatever is excavated, all the excavated rock, which comes out as gravel, mostly, you can plausibly explain as being produced by the mine or by the quarry. And then it can be sold. You see, there's a twofer.
Right.
Not only do you get rid of what you had, of what you're doing, but crushed rock and gravel are commercially valuable commodities in themselves, which can be sold for and generate profits of many millions of dollars.
Right, right, right. So it becomes it's not a loss. It's also
Oh no, it's
generating
not a
an
loss.
income on the side.
It's another revenue stream.
And I think it was you. I heard you say this once too. That as some of these underground, digging is going on, that they also sometimes run into, the mother lode, so to speak, of precious metals as well, and then they are there's another source of income.
Well, Paul, let me tell you, I've talked to a number of people about the underground base at in the Sandias, because I used to live in New Mexico, and one of the men that talked to me about that facility said that during the construction, because the Rocky Mountains, or the mountainous region of the western United States, is mineral rich. Those mountains have a lot of minerals, including gold. And in the construction of this underground facility in the Monsanto Mountains, which went on for years, and I believe it may continue to the present day, the generals in charge of the operation confiscated all of the gold that was mined in the course of digging the tunnels and things. And he gave me one example. At one time, well, when you make tunnels and things underground, to buttress the rock, you put in what are called roof bolts. And they're like long, strong steel rods that you screw into the rock to keep the rock from slabbing off and falling on your head. It strengthens the rock in the overhead and the roof of the tunnels and caverns and chambers.
Right.
So in the process of doing this work, of course, there's some welding involved, and they have to cut metal with acetylene torches and so forth. Don't you know that from time to time when they were doing this, because the rock was actually gold ore in some places, that the liquid gold would just run out of the rock and puddle on the floor, slabs of solid gold on the floor, because they would run into veins of gold every once in a while. And he told me that all of that gold was confiscated by the American military generals who were overseeing the project. Of course, they just enriched themselves. It's a classified project.
Right.
So I mean, who's going to know, right?
Exactly.
It's their gold. If they walk out with 50 pounds of gold every day, I mean, who's going to tell them no?
I guess they found El Dorado.
Yeah, so who's going to tell them no? And I'm sure that's happened more than once. And in fact, there's another revenue stream, right?
Yeah, totally.
And of course, in the case of the undersea basis, one of the possible functions of undersea basis that I've found discussed in the literature was just this: undersea mining. The ocean floor, in places, is quite rich in minerals, including the rock down in the subsea floor. And you can think of all kinds of minerals. Let's think of diamonds, or uranium, or gold, silver, platinum, whatever, or rare earth minerals. Some of the rare earth minerals are actually more valuable than gold or than diamonds. And so there's enormous mineral wealth, not only underground, but undersea as well. And if you have, in the process of constructing an undersea base, say you've done some preliminary core sampling, and the seafloor has been sampled, geologically all over the world for decades. The so-called Geoides program, which I reference in my third book, Underwater and Underground Bases, has drilled literally thousands of deep cores in the seafloor all over the world. So geologists have a pretty good idea of the mineral composition of the seafloor all over the world. The various geological strata, they have actual physical core samples. So, if you want to put a secret nuclear missile base or a secret submarine base somewhere, or a secret joint extraterrestrial human base, 300 miles out to sea or 1,000 miles out to sea, why not pick a place where there's a very high probability of finding commercially valuable veins of gold or platinum or diamonds or whatever, rare earth metals, so that you get your base, but in the process of excavating your base, you'll also get millions or even billions of dollars worth of extremely valuable minerals that you can either sell quietly on the black market or, depending on the extraterrestrial faction you may be dealing with, you may make a deal with them. My understanding is, just anecdotally, that some of these extraterrestrial factions have a mining interest in the earth. One of the reasons they're interested in the earth is because there's certain minerals here.
Is it possible that they're not so much extraterrestrial as they are intraterrestrial?
Both. I think we have a variety of terrestrial beings. Of course, the various human races. But I think there are also intelligent insect species here, intelligent reptilian species. And there's a good deal of evidence for that in mythology, and it looks like there are also intelligent amphibian and or fish species here on this world, and have been for a long time. And there
so then this world is not necessarily, which of course is supported by the Bible, which I won't go into here, but that the intelligences that inhabit this planet, they're not limited to just surface-dwelling humans.
I don't think so, and I think that's been true for many thousands of years. And then we have a variety of terrestrial species that are not necessarily human, that may be native to this planet, going back a long time, also with great technological sophistication. Now, then of course there's a lot of evidence that indicates there are a variety of extraterrestrial species or races that are here as well. Some of the extraterrestrial races are human or human-like. Not all of them. Some of them seem to be insect-like or reptilian-like or
like in a Star Wars movie, you see all these different creatures.
I think Star Wars. Yes, Star Wars, of course, the producer or director of the Star Wars franchise is George Lucas. He's a well-known, very prominent Hollywood personality. But he also is a very high-level Freemason. Now, my research indicates that the Freemasons, at the highest levels, have a body of secret information, secret history that goes back thousands of years. To gain access to this, you have to be an insider at the highest levels of Freemasonry.
A lot of these guys in Hollywood are, I suppose, they have access to information which they portray in their movies as fiction, which us average people don't have access to, and most people think that it's just fiction, but actually it's a depiction of nonfiction.
Yes, well, I think George Lucas would fall into that category, and I agree. I think James Cameron would fall into that same category, probably Steven Spielberg to an extent, and some of the others, whose names I don't know. I don't know every director in Hollywood,
right.
But those are a few of the famous ones. And
he was Stanley Kubrick.
Yes, he certainly would be in that number. But after his last film, Eyes Wide Shut, about these
the rituals
about these
of
secrets. Yes, these
The
sexual
right.
rituals of the very powerful movers and shakers in politics and high finance and so forth. Um, he kind of blew the lid off of that, and his film premiered, and I think within a week or two he was dead.
Right. Yeah.
Um, I think someone killed Stanley Kubrick to shut him up. I think he was, he made a lot of films that were groundbreaking, but I think he came too close to an important truth about how the system works, and I believe he was killed to shut him up.
Yeah, but it's quite possible. These kind of things are. Yes, he was a healthy man. He was only in his early 60s or something. So for him to just, not that it cannot happen, but giving people heart attacks is of course one of the methods that are employed by these covert agencies, etc. That want to eliminate somebody and make it look like a natural cause. So it is quite
It happens all the time.
Right.
It happens all the time, and there is a good deal of evidence for a sort of a hit squad that operates in Hollywood that takes out people for a variety of reasons. Going way back to the days of L. Ron Hubbard and even before, there's been a very dark undercurrent in Hollywood. For example, Marilyn Monroe was probably killed to shut her up,
Right.
keep her quiet. And so those would be just two examples right there. And there have been other unexpected deaths of prominent Hollywood figures over the last several decades. Those are just two that come to mind immediately. But I don't have any problem believing that the intelligence agencies send in the cleaners, so to speak, when someone like Marilyn Monroe or Stanley Kubrick, both of whom, because of the circles they moved in and the relationships they had with powerful and influential people or knowledgeable people, certainly knew things that the average person does not. And because of the high public profile they had, they probably reached a point where certain people decided to take them out to shut them up.
Now these bases. Now going back to our the topic, about these bases.
Yes.
Now, according to your research, there are any number, like probably dozens, if not hundreds, that are just in the United States. Okay.
There are a lot of them.
Right. So now we have heard about this, COG, the continuity of government in the case of a nuclear war and all that sort of things, But just the size and magnitude of these installations and these facilities, it seems like it can't be just something that it's a contingency preparation. So they must serve some other major purpose. And if I recall, in one of your programs, you were also describing that they're not just places where people go to live, or that they actually have manufacturing facilities. Is that correct? Where they can, pretty much manufacture anything? It's like there's a whole world right beneath our feet.
Yes, that's what I've been told. One of the examples I was given, and understand, I have never worked on the inside of any of these programs. I've never had a security clearance. I've never been employed by one of these big corporations or government agencies, military or non-military. So I've never been on the inside of these things. My research is archival and also anecdotal, in that I've interviewed a surprising spectrum of people over the last 20 years from all walks of life, some of whom actually worked in these programs and have been in the facilities. And one of the engineers told me that he spent his career as a mechanical engineer, I believe, or maybe electrical, or both. In any event, working in these facilities. And there are people who spend their career in these facilities, are quite large. And he described, according to him, the Cheyenne Mountain facility, what we see on TV and in Hollywood films, is just part of what is there. That's impressive enough in its own right. But he told me there are other levels below, going down much deeper, even deeper, larger, and more sophisticated, and that there are not just cutting edge manufacturing industrial facilities underground, but they're really science fiction like. And that the example he gave me was in the event that there was um, a need to jumpstart civilization all over again, to restart civilization, instead of going back to the era of bows and arrows and chipping out arrowheads from flint by hand and hunting deer with bows and arrows and with spears, that it would jump ahead a few thousand years. It would go right back to about the 1960s or 1970s, if not before, in that, if not later, in that not just the blueprints, physical blueprints, but also digitized plans and raw materials, rubber, glass, steel, titanium, you name it, is all stockpiled down there. And also even materials more raw than that, the raw feedstock to make steel and all of these other things, meaning the coal and the coke and iron ore and all of that is down there, such that if they needed to make a generic automobile, for example, it wouldn't necessarily be a Stingray Corvette, but just a generic automobile with four wheels, two seats, a steering wheel, an engine, a transmission, etc. They could do that from scratch. They can make the rubber tires. They could make the transmission, the gears in the transmission. They could make the differential gears, all of that. They could make the engine block. They could machine the cylinders and the pistons. They could physically make the spark plugs. They would have the glass to make the ceramic part and the metal, the copper and what have you to make the metal part of it. They would be able to manufacture the gasoline. I mean, the wires, the steering wheel, everything from A to Z. Or if they needed to make a tabletop radio, they could make the either transistors or vacuum tubes. They could make the capacitors, the resistors, all of that. Or if they needed to make a record player or a CD player or a generic television, you name it.
Or medical supplies or, surgical
whatever.
equipment, anything like that.
Whatever. A locomotive, a railway locomotive.
Right.
Anything that they have these big manufacturing facilities underground. They have machine shops. They have foundries. It's all there, ready to go. And there's not just one or two of these. From what he told me, there are multiple facilities. I don't know how many total. He described about 5 or 6. For all I know, there are 50 or 60 or 100. But there are at least several of them.
And he
they're not all
himself might not have known of all of them, so...
No, he wouldn't because of the compartmentalization. He was just describing to me facilities he knew about in Colorado and Nevada and California. But his impression was there were multiple of these facilities in multiple regions of North America and mainland North America, so that it's all there. And people think, well, if there's all-out nuclear war, that's the end of it. Well, their point of view is no, because they'll start it all over again, and they'll hardly skip a beat. I mean, if you had to go back and live with 1970s or the technology in 1965, you could easily do that. I mean, you'd have fans, you'd have radios, you'd have record players, you'd have television, you'd have automobiles, you would have trains, etc. Telephones. He described all of this they can make it, and so technological civilization would begin right away, and they'd bring it right up into the second half of the 20th century. They wouldn't lose hardly any time at all.
No, I'm a bit of a science fiction movie and shows buff, and what I have also just from reading some stuff on the internet and through these programs, etc., what comes across is that they also have a veritable Noah's Ark of genetic material as well, from which they can reconstitute basically just about any species as well. So it's not just limited to manufacturing, devices. It can also they can also create life.
Well, that and also even more on a more prosaic level, there are many stories about cloning and genetic engineering and secret underground bases. By the way, I I am very very open to that. There's so many stories about it that I'm pretty sure it's going on. Um, with some, it appears, with some extraterrestrial involvement, but there's also on a more prosaic level. One of the anecdotal accounts that I was told while I was doing my research in this would have been in the late 90s or early 2000s, that during the Ronald Reagan administration, in one of the secret underground bases in the National Forest in California, this is up in the Sierra in California, that the agency involved went to Native American food seed sources in the southwestern United States, and got a very wide variety of seeds from food crops that Native American peoples have been growing traditionally over the centuries in the American Southwest, because those crops, those seeds from those crops, have greater genetic viability and vigor than the commercially available hybrid seeds that are on the market today. So that if they had to plant those seeds, they would have a much higher probability of getting some kind of viable crop, because there's been such great climatic variation in the Southwest. Sometimes it rains, sometimes you have years of drought, but through it all, these American Indian groups have survived and have continued farming and raising their melons and squash and corn and beans and other crops. And this is what they have, according to the story I was told, sequestered in at least one of the secret bases in the mountains in California.
Oh yes, that's it, and of course we know about that famous facility in Norway where they have also stored all manners of grain seeds.
That's right.
And that's in itself is not a bad idea, especially with all the GMO crap that's going on, which is making all the seed varieties we have today much more susceptible to diseases and such things. So to preserve an heirloom seed is actually a good idea, but the question is, in case of a catastrophe, would that be available to the masses, which is the...
No, sir. No, sir, it won't.
Yes.
It won't.
That doesn't surprise us, does it?
The seeds and the seed vaults are not meant for the masses. The masses, at least in the United States and some other countries, are being fed genetically modified food at this point. So you can see right there what the plan is for the masses.
Well, can we say extinction?
Yes, because what is coming out with the research in recent years is that these genetically modified crops not only produce dangerous disease conditions, they tend to produce sterility after 2 or 3 generations.
Sterility in the people or in the crops?
No, in the organisms that consume them.
Okay.
This is what's been found in hogs, for example, in lab rats, that in the first generation they get very diseased. They get cancer, and in fact, we have a raging cancer epidemic. And in subsequent generations, their offspring and the offspring of their offspring tend to become sterile and cannot reproduce. So, given the very wide consumption of genetically modified food, especially in the United States in recent years, is it any surprise we have a raging cancer epidemic, number one, and fertility rates are declining. Male sperm, for example, the sperm level, viable sperm level, is declining rapidly.
Right, right. Yes, yes. Well, before we perhaps we'll leave that for another time as to the spiritual and overarching reasons for all these things and why they're happening the way they are. Because I mean, it's quite apparent that the people that are, or at least the people that we think are running the show, they are uh, evil beyond comprehension. They're all like we are living sort of on the island of Dr. Moreau, and it's just mad scientists running amok everywhere. But we won't go there. One question I wanted to ask you, Richard, about these bases is
Yes.
it necessary that all of them have actually been excavated in modern times? Is it possible that some of these are just being reoccupied and they have existed
Yes,
since ancient times?
I think so. Um, I've caught whispers of that here and there. I've never had a scientist or engineer who's directly involved in these programs tell me that, but I have heard rumors that from time to time they have either broken into or pretty well known where they were going and have come across ancient tunnels and or ancient facilities that were built unknown thousands of years ago by unknown parties for unknown reasons. But yes, I think based on what I've heard, and I can't document any of that, but based on what I've heard, I think that some of that has gone on. Yes.
Now, I come from, I'm originally from India, and in that part of the world, especially in the Tibet region and around in the Himalayas, you hear stories about Shambhala and all these Agartha and all these underground, places that are underground worlds, essentially, not just a small city or something, underground worlds that have existed in myth and legend for a very, very long time. So it seems like really is nothing new under the sun, that such things have indeed been going on since antiquity. And you're right, like, we don't know the exact time frame when they happened or who the parties involved in it were that dug this place up, but this is certainly just the latest episode in this saga that has been going on for a very long time.
Well, you're right, and I'm not a Vedic scholar, but I have read some of the Vedas, and you cannot read the Mahabharata or the Ramayana, for example, without encountering references to the celestials and to the hundreds of thousands of types of human beings that live in the universe, in the galaxy, and of their technological prowess, the technologies they have, the Vimanas, their aerial flying cars, their military weaponry, etc. And it's clear that many of these stories go back thousands of years, and in some, you talk to some Hindu yogis, and they will tell you that some of these stories even go back millions of years, which may be true. But nonetheless, it's clear that there are cycles of technological civilization on this planet, and they go way back. We don't even know the true history of the planet we live on. We are living deep in ignorance.
Yes, you are absolutely right. Now, this again is what you might call esoteric knowledge or occult knowledge that is hidden in plain sight, which is in the Bible. And this you don't hear at church, but according to the Bible, there have been at least three major epochs or three major ages in which massive, not just planetary, but cosmic destruction has taken place of very highly advanced. And the further back in time you go, the more technologically advanced those civilizations that predated us were. Okay. And of course, then we have the fourth episode, which would be the story of Noah's flood. And talking about that flood time, there was an interesting anecdote in your book, which I really enjoyed reading, which is about how the U.S. Navy has scoured the ocean floors for ancient artifacts?
Well, I don't know if they're ancient artifacts. This comes out of John Pena Craven's book, The Silent War. John Pena Craven was the highest level Navy research scientist. He's a PhD oceanographer. And during the height of the Cold War, from about the mid or late 1950s up into the early to mid 1970s, he was the highest level Navy research scientist. He was tasked with developing the capability in the post-World War II Navy of working down to the depth of 20,000 feet below the surface. That's like 4 miles deep, and carrying out major naval operations in that environment, which he did. He discusses some things in his book cryptically, of course, since he worked with classified, compartmentalized programs. Not everything he did is in his book. In fact, I assume that most of what he did is not in his book. But you can get a few ideas from reading his book, which I did. And one of the things he says is that the Navy, under his direction, undertook a submarine survey meaning an underwater survey of the ocean floor and the continental shelves all over the world, and that they charted, I forget the exact number, I think it was thousands of objects of interest. I forget his exact words.
Now, those objects of interest, they could be ancient artifacts, could they not?
I would assume some of them are.
Yeah.
I would assume some of it was Chinese and Russian technology, alien technology, ancient technology. I think it was because the language he used in describing what they did was they went out to look for technology and items of interest that were scattered around on the continental shelves and ocean floor all over the world. And he doesn't really specify exactly what those items were in his book. He leaves it very open, and I'm assuming that some of it would have been from previous civilizations because
I mean, when you reason it out, it is just not possible that these are just sunken Russian or Chinese craft if they're scattered all over, over the world.
There was some of them. No, some of that was
right.
Some of it would have been sunken submarines, Nazi submarines, and Japanese submarines,
right?
Soviet submarines, etc. But because he didn't specify what it was, I'm assuming that
it was more than just that.
More than that, and more than terrestrial technology from the modern era. And so I am assuming, and there's a good deal of anecdotal evidence, including some very interesting evidence, that one of the things that the American military has gone after over basically the last century at least, is crashed UFO technology. Now the water, most of the Earth's surface is covered by the oceans and the large seas and lakes, the vast majority of it. So, given that there have been apparently dozens, if not more, of these crash retrievals by various military agencies, mostly but not only in the United States, I'm assuming that they went after some of this stuff at sea as well that they detected.
Now, these may not necessarily have crashed in modern times. These craft themselves could be of great antiquity. Like if you're talking about some cosmic wars that occurred, like for example, as described in the Mahabharata or something like that, or even in the Bible,
yes,
that if these occurred in ages which have long gone, possibly thousands, maybe millions of years ago, then some of that technology may still be existing on the ocean floors, if nowhere else.
Oh, yes. Yes, sir.
So now we were discussing these objects that the Navy was scouring for on the ocean floors. And if you recall that movie, I don't know if you ever saw it or not, that movie Waterworld with Kevin Costner,
Yes, I did.
Did you ever see that movie?
Yes, I did.
You remember that scene where he goes down and like there's a city like New York City on the bottom of the ocean floor. So I
I
mean,
don't. I don't remember that particular scene, but
yeah, it was quite it was quite a startling scene, and for that
yes.
reason alone, the movie itself was sort of mediocre. But there were some visuals in it that were very striking, and that was one of them, which is
Well,
always
this has been, the work of Graham Hancock, for example. I don't know if you've ever interviewed Graham Hancock, but he's written about the civilizations that existed before and the very enigmatic archaeological remains that have been found underwater in various regions around the world that prove that, in fact, there are submerged cities from previous civilizations that really do exist. And mainstream archaeology is not investigating it very much, doesn't have much to say about it, and yet these places do exist. The world has not always been as it is now. And the during the last ice age, for example, the sea level was something like 300 feet or 350 feet lower than it is now, and it appears that there were large cities built out on what would have been then the coastal plains of the various continents. But when the waters rose, those human areas of human habitation were submerged, and people had to move farther inland. So there was a flood. It didn't happen in 40 days and 40 nights. But it appears it took place over a period of years or decades, maybe even centuries. And the water may have come in and gone out, and come in and gone out. But eventually, over a period of a couple thousand years, it came in more than it went out, and now it's much higher than it was, say, 15,000 years ago.
But then that's what interested me in that was one of the statements that you had in your book was that this project that the Navy had undertaken, one of its objectives was undersea archaeology, and that by definition necessitates that they believed that there was something under the waters that is of an archaeological nature. It is not just something that's natural.
No, I'm not sure that I saw in my documentation anything specifically citing an undersea Navy archaeological program.
No, it is. I'm quite sure. Like I'll send it to you on which page I read that in your book. It did say that. That's where I got it from. It's hidden in plain sight, and it talks about the Navy scouring the floor for undersea object, and it was somewhere.
Well, that's true. That's true. There was a program where they surveyed the undersea for objects of interest, and artifacts and objects of interest. So yeah, that is an archaeological program. You're right.
Right.
Broadly defined. I don't know if that entailed. I suspect it did, but I can't document conclusively that it did.
But they wouldn't come out and say that yes, there's all these ancient cities that are submerged in the waters underground, because that would upset the whole paradigm of this evolutionary model that they have given us. So I mean,
one of the things I did find when I was doing my research was I did talk to some people who were involved at a high level in the Navy and also in other agencies and organizations. By high level, I mean they weren't admirals or anything like that, but that they worked in some of these programs, in compartmentalized programs. And one of these scientists told me that we got to talking about Atlantis, and I asked him if the stories about Atlantis were true. And he didn't say yes, he didn't say no.
Right.
But he said, if you were going to look for Atlantis, you might look on the Atlantic seafloor to the west of Gibraltar, a few hundred miles. And in fact, there have been some discoveries in recent years of some very interesting geometrically regular grids on the seafloor a few hundred miles out in the Atlantic Ocean to the west of Gibraltar, as well as other places around the world. Um, I rather suspect that even today there's a thriving lot of activity on the seafloor, let's put it that way, all over the world. But that Atlantis, or at least part of what we might think of as Atlantis, was out in the mid-Atlantic west of Gibraltar. Um, he suggested I pursue that. I didn't have the time or the financial means to do it at that point, and I may never. But that's certainly one of the places that I would look. The issue with that type of research is that the research site is thousands of feet below the surface of the ocean.
Right, yeah.
So that right there adds a huge layer of difficulty.
Of course. And you know what? You have read reports of these submerged, man-made structures, and actually I've seen photographs of some of them off the coast of Japan, which are indisputable. But also, heard reports of these kind of sort of places, and close to the Bahamas, close to Cuba, and but eventually nothing ever comes out of it. They just sort of disappear into the, the mist of history, so to speak.
Well, here's the reality. It takes a lot of money and equipment to research those sites. And, not thousands of dollars, but tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars or more.
Or millions, yes.
Yes, and I don't have that kind of money. And no one's really going to give you that kind of money. So the issue is that you may make a discovery, but absolutely lack the funding to follow up on it. That's just the reality of the world we live in. And the reason people lack that funding and can't obtain it is because the gatekeepers, as soon as they learn that a discovery has been made, clamp the lid down hard to keep the information from getting out. And one of the ways they clamp the lid down is by preventing the people who make the discovery from obtaining funding to continue their research.
Yep, agreed. Now, these, one more before we go. I want to give you an opportunity to, tell us all about your website and such, and where people can order your books. But before we do that, another interesting fact that you mentioned in your book is about these submersibles that go down to like 20,000 feet, which you mentioned earlier in the program, which is almost like 4 miles. Now, the water pressure at that depth must be enormous indeed. So is it just like some sort of strong alloy or something that's preventing these things from collapsing? Or do you think there's also some kind of technology that involves some sort of force field that surrounds these vessels as they go down that prevents that sort of pressure being exerted on it?
Yeah, you're right. At that depth, you have like thousands of pounds of pressure per square inch. It's phenomenal. And what I discovered in my research is that at great depth, pure glass that's fabricated with a very high level of quality control, is stronger than the strongest structural steel, like 20 times stronger. So my research suggests, and John Pena Craven provides some hints in his book, The Silent War, that in the process of developing the technology to work at very great depth, work and excavate and construct things at thousands of feet down beneath the surface of the sea, that early on the U.S. Navy discovered that constructing structures with pure high-quality glass actually made a lot of sense, because glass under great pressure is far stronger than the strongest structural steel. Now, this is opposite to our perceived wisdom.
Right.
Received wisdom. We assume that steel is stronger than glass because you can take a steel crowbar and smash a pane of glass. And so
right.
we assume steel is much stronger than glass. Undersea, that's not true. Undersea, deep undersea, pure glass is far stronger than the strongest steel. It's the other way around. And so I assume, based on the hints that he drops in his book, that what they work with deep undersea is pure glass
Hmm.
because it's so strong. Now, he did say that Edward Teller, the father, in that book, he said that Edward Teller, the father of the H bomb, um, of course, Edward Teller worked at a very high level of the military-industrial complex, and so did John Pena Craven, and so they interfaced. John Edward Teller had asked him to construct nuclear missile silos made of glass embedded in the seafloor. I'm assuming there probably are
Right.
glass nuclear missile silos on the ocean floor. Um, and he also discussed their plans, their research and design to make submersibles out of glass. Um, I'm assuming some of that has been done as well. I would assume there's an entire deep undersea technology made of glass. And of course, this has implications for making domes on the ocean floor out of glass. I'm sure the average person would think, oh, they're thinking of a greenhouse with glass panes. They think if you would make a structure out of glass on the ocean floor, that it would just be squashed like an egg cell in a fraction of a second. On the contrary, it would be extremely strong. If it were properly designed and properly engineered, it would be extremely strong, almost indestructible, and made of solid glass. So, pardon me,
That's very
I'm,
interesting.
I'm assuming that's been done. And he drops those in his books. And of course, in the course of my research, I also ran across anecdotal accounts of domed cities in the deep ocean, not necessarily of terrestrial human construction, but built by others.
It's like in that movie in the one of the Star Wars movies where they have this whole underground city and in the lake, So that yeah, again, those kind of stories are found in just about every culture. So I'm sure there's some truth to it. They may not necessarily be constructed by the U.S. Navy, but I, for one, would tend to believe that they do exist.
Well, what we've had in recent years, uh, running back at least to the late um, 20th century and first years of the 21st century, we've had trillions of dollars that have gone missing, that have been unaccounted for. Um, in the United States federal government system alone, not counting what's going on in other parts of the world, but even in the United States federal government system, trillions of dollars that have turned up missing and unaccounted for. And the money is going somewhere. It's being used for something. The obvious conclusion, the logical conclusion is that it's going into covert programs, clandestine projects, the black budget compartmentalized operations, uh, part of which would be comprised in the kinds of things we've been discussing in this interview. Just vast sums of money, Paul, are being
Right.
sucked off out of sight. They're going into, I believe, literal high-tech holes in the ground, and probably also to a very advanced parallel secret space program or parallel secret space programs, plural.
Yes, I would. Most people they're not even aware that the U.S. Air Force has a space command, and therefore, it's quite obvious that there is a sophisticated space program that already exists, and that is not just a space shuttle. It's far more advanced than that.
Well, I wrote a little book called The Richard Sauder Briefing. It went out of print a year or two ago. It came out in German first, actually, and English second. And it's just a little briefing book, really short and easy to read. Um, there wasn't much interest in it, so it's gone out of print. But one of the things that I discuss in that book is that there have been at least 3 separate documented military manned space programs parallel to the space program, NASA manned space program, going back to the 1950s, with the dinosaur program, which started the United States Air Force. Neil Armstrong is allegedly the first man to walk on the moon. Whether he did or he didn't is a subject of another conversation. But he came over to the NASA manned space program from the United States Air Force manned space program, the dinosaur, so-called dinosaur program, in the 1950s, early 1960s. He was an Air Force astronaut and came to NASA already as an astronaut from the Air Force program to the NASA program. And then there were two other United States military manned space programs parallel to what NASA is doing that have been publicly documented. I am assuming that the United States military and perhaps other organizations as well have had for decades their own parallel manned space program that also has been putting up astronauts into space to do secret things that we don't know about.
Yes,
and I provide the documentation for that. In fact, and I've been told that quietly, and it's interesting by more than one person. It's interesting that I found that documentation on the public record. And number two, that Gary McKinnon, the so-called hacker from England, about 10 years ago or a little more, was arrested and almost extradited. He had to fight for his life for years to prevent being extradited from Britain to the United States because he hacked into government computer systems in the United States, military and non-military. And in one of those systems, he actually found secret records for a parallel manned space program, an offshore fleet of ships, off-planet fleet of ships, and a parallel officer structure, off-planet officers, evidently in the American Navy. And this exists parallel to NASA and parallel to the open, more public Navy command structure. And for that, he was arrested and almost extradited to the United States, where he would have been imprisoned certainly for decades in a federal prison, American federal prison. So if there's nothing to see, why did they go ape shit and try to bury this man in some maximum security prison in the United States? It's because he stumbled across something that they would rather people not know about, which is probably only one of their secret space programs.
So we have secret space programs, we have secret Navy programs, we have secret, subterranean programs. It's just like there's secrets everywhere. Did you find that the world, especially the official world, has become far more secretive, and it's much more hard to find documentation beyond the late 60s or so? Like, you have a lot of your documentation that you coded came out in it was in the 1960s or 50s, but beyond after that,
not all of it, a fair amount, but not only then, a fair amount is from later years as well.
But what I'm trying to say is that one would think that with the advancements of technology which are in the public realm, okay, that's which is not in the public domain, they must necessarily have been exponentially greater. But it seems that it's much more difficult to find any sort of documentation to back that up. Well,
there's been a lot of cleaning of archives, and it has become physically more difficult to access archives.
Right.
Under the Barack Obama government, for example, it has become far more difficult to access information than it was 10 or 20 years ago. It would be much harder for me to conduct the research I did 20 years ago today. In fact, I would say it would be extremely difficult.
That's what I was trying to say. That is far more the difficulty in accessing.
It's bureaucratic.
Right.
There have been bureaucratic controls that have been imposed, in part because of researchers like me and Ryan Wood and his father, Dr. Wood, who have found a lot of information about crash retrievals of UFOs by American military agencies. There's my book, my work on the underground bases, and other people have done work on James Banford's work, for example, on the NSA. He's produced a couple of very well-researched books on the NSA and all of its spying. And now in the last year or so, you've had Edward Snowden come out. And so more and more, the power structure is becoming alarmed at the amount of information that's coming out. And now they're going into a mode where they're starting to clamp down. And so I may have had a good window of opportunity to do a body of research in a time frame of 10 to 20 years ago that today would be extremely difficult to carry out because of the bureaucratic roadblocks that are being put in place.
Well, Richard, I for one am very grateful for the labor that you have put into your research, because it certainly is very eye-opening, and it has been more than just it's more than just a subject of interest to me. It is because it's a window into the real world, so that we are not, it's a tool to bring us out of the matrix, so I'm appreciative of that. Now, before we wind up here, you are down in Ecuador, and you had a tragedy that befell you there, so perhaps you want to tell listeners a little bit about that, and also how you are in need of some assistance. So please use this venue as to appeal to anybody that's listening that might be, able to help you out. And I would recommend all listeners, who are in a position to do so, to help you in your situation that you find yourself at the moment. So could you please tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, Paul. My website is eventhorizon.blogspot.com, and that's linked to on your website where this program appears. And my books are advertised there for people who would like to acquire the books. And I have been in Ecuador. I'm into my 4th year here. I spent a year living with a shaman in the Amazon region of Ecuador. And in my last days with him, in the course of a shamanic ceremony with him, I was very badly abused and physically and emotionally and spiritually deeply traumatized, such that I was hospitalized more than 4 months in the public hospitals here in Ecuador, and I was left unable to walk initially. I have regained the ability to walk slowly and haltingly, but I'm on my feet again. I went through terrific suffering and pain. I had multiple injuries. I had internal lesions. I had multiple contusions. I was left with terrific rash, actually bubbles on my skin. I lost equilibrium. I couldn't walk. I couldn't even stand up. I was in tremendous pain. At one point, I couldn't even feel my feet for a period of weeks. And thank God I am in process of recuperating. I'm a lot better this year than I was last, but I still have a long way to go. And I filed a criminal complaint against this man, and the case is working its way through the legal system here in Ecuador, slowly. It's been difficult for me, extremely emotionally draining, of course, physically and emotionally traumatizing, and also has been just ruined me financially. Whatever financial resources I had, I ran through months ago, and I have an ongoing need to pay my attorneys for assisting me in this case. It's going through the legal system, and also in my recuperation, I have some medical expenses attendant to that as well. And the long and the short of it is that I am very grateful for any and all donations that people send me. I'm in need of it and thankful for it. I do have articles posted on my blog site about how people can do that, either using Bitcoin or Western Union are the two best ways for me. And I have those directions appended to the end of the articles on that I post on my blog site. So if people are willing or able to help me, I deeply appreciate and need the assistance. And the direction as to how to do that are at my blog site, eventhorizonchronicle.blogspot.com.
Thank you, Richard. It's been indeed pleasure having you on, and you have, of course, you are a great researcher, and your information, as you don't delve too much into speculative realm. You do support whatever you claim by documentation, which is always a good thing, because it proves to us the reality of the research that you have conducted, that these things are very, very real. And yes, whenever there is some speculation, that you are careful to mention that, this is your conclusion based on the evidence that you have seen. Your book, which I'm reading, Hidden in Plain Sight Beyond the X-Files, is truly a very interesting read. And I will also be ordering the rest of your books, and I want to read those as well. And I hope that, you will come back on here again, and we will continue this discussion, because the topic is very vast, like the oceans and the ocean floors in our planet. They're almost immeasurable. So, I mean, this topic really has no end. And of course, one of the subjects I want to get into later on is with you, would be at another time, would be as to the purpose and the reason why all this construction has gone on in recent times. What might it be an indication of? So we will get into that perhaps another time. But at this time, again, your website is eventhorizonchronicle.blogspot.com, and I would, suggest I will post that link with the show, and I will recommend all listeners to go and read up on Richard's information there. So again, Richard, thank you very much for coming.